My name is Chris Hunt, and I am the Executive Director of Dreamwell Theatre. Welcome to our Remembering 9/11 program. Tonight, we want to reflect on the event and impact of 9/11 through theater, music, and discussion. We will present two scenes from our current production, That Day in September, Remember Those Who Died, and talk with all of you about its effect on us today and our hopes for the future. To start things off, I introduce you to Matt Faldudo, a founder of Dreamwell Theatre and director of That Day in September.
Earlier this year, I received an email from a New York playwright, Artie Van Wy. He worked across the street from the World Trade Center when the towers were hit. Artie had written about his experiences of 9/11 in the form of a monologue entitled That Day in September, which he performed as a one-man show on both coasts. That's what makes this show particularly poignant. It's one 9/11 survivor's story told in his own words. The Dreamwell board and I thought it was time to bring to the stage a show about 9/11 to get people to start talking about where we're at now. People were so angry after that attack 6 years ago, and that anger can lead to some terrible consequences for our nation and the world, and we need to remember how we felt then and how that has affected our country. Our production of Artie's play is done as an ensemble piece with 8 actors, all telling part of Artie's story. While each of these actors speak in Artie's voice, they can also be thought of as specific American archetypes of a blue-collar worker, parent, a business vice president, a teacher, police officer, student, musician, and office worker. The emotions that Artie dealt with ring true for all Americans, even those of us here in the middle of Iowa. We all felt the fear, horror, and pain in our own way. Tonight we are going to present to you 2 scenes from That Day in September. The first describes the wonder, beauty, and awesomeness of the World Trade Center. The second depicts Artie's return to the site sometime after the attack. In between these 2 scenes, we will read a newspaper account of that day's events.
For whatever side you're under normally.
I fell in love with the World Trade Center my first week down there. Oh, well, certainly I'd been down there a few times before in all my years of living in New York, usually as a tour guide for friends and family who happened to be visiting. Then I thought it was all about just going to the observation deck. I had no idea that those twin towers and what was below them and what surrounded them were like a city within a city.
I loved getting downtown early each day and developed a regular daily routine. I would come up from the subway and onto the street by 8 a.m. If it wasn't raining, which I don't remember it doing much during the first few months that I worked there, I would walk the few blocks to the World Trade Center. The streets were always dotted with the familiar sight of shiny aluminum carts, each just large enough for a person to stand inside while serving coffee, bagels, and assorted pastries. I went to one of those carts, and I went to that same cart every morning, including the morning of the 11th. Now, I didn't know his name, and he didn't know mine, but the man inside that cart became my coffee man. Within the first week, he had memorized exactly how I took my coffee, which I think he tried to do for all of his regular customers. Each morning, he would greet me with a,
"Good morning, my friend,"
and had my large coffee, half regular, half decaf, skim milk, sweet and low on the side, ready by the time I had my dollar out. If I happened to miss stopping by on any given morning, he would ask where I was the next time he saw me. That kind of thing only happens in this city.
with a copy of the newspaper I picked up, I'd sit each morning on one of the stone slab benches that were around the perimeter of the fountain at the World Trade Center. I'd read my paper, drink my coffee, smoke a cigarette. I watched the people passing me by on their way to work. Often during that morning ritual of mine, I felt reassured that life was good. If the weather were favorable, the sky a bright blue, the summer breeze light and warm, it seemed to me in those quiet minutes alone that all was right with the world, just as it did that morning in September.
If the weather was bad, there was the massive shopping mall beneath those looming towers. There was a spectrum of stores and shops to look through, all those places to get something to eat. I also spent many a lunch hour in the bookstore in building number 5, flipping through magazines, looking for the next great book to read, or listening to music in the CD section.
But my favorite thing to do at lunchtime, if the weather permitted, was to sit in that expansive plaza area, watched over not only by the towers, but by the other buildings that made up the World Trade Center. It was summer, and summer down at the World Trade Center was glorious. At lunchtime, the plaza would be filled with people and activity. Vendors selling hot dogs or ice cream or pretzels. People would fill up that plaza with energy and activity. People eating their lunch brought from home or brought from home. The men would have their suit jackets off, their ties loosened, their top shirt buttons undone. Women would be sitting with their shoes kicked off. People would be sitting within and around that plaza area, getting a head start on their tans, their heads tilted back, facing the sun, getting those few important minutes of sun time.
And then there were the tourists, identifiable by the inevitable camera, in their hands or around their necks. Now, they're easy targets to poke fun at, but they're the ones who remind me of the magic of this city. Seeing in their expressions, hearing in their exclamations, the astonishment of all the things that they're experiencing all around them.
Then there was the fountain, balancing the sculpture of a sphere atop it with a stylized globe made up of different colored metals. Sat right in the middle of the plaza, circled by one continuous bench. I often sat there, my own face up to the sun, listening to the soft sound of the water spilling over into the fountain's bottom. If I closed my eyes, I could pretend I was near an ocean shore. Very relaxing.
During the summer months, there were free noontime concerts in the plaza. Rows of folding chairs would be arranged in front of a temporary stage of steel and metal. Each day, a particular style of music would be performed live. Jazz, country, bebop, doo-wop, or my favorite, golden oldies. Here I'd be in the middle of New York City, in the middle of my workday, listening to Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits one day, or Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders on another. On these days in particular, the golden oldies days, people would get out of their folding chair and dance right where they were. An elderly couple here, two young co-workers over there, the maintenance man, the businessman, the young secretary, all forgetting that they would soon have to be returning to work. And oh yes, the tourists, smiling for the picture of being taken of them dancing away.
Perhaps I idealize it now that it's gone, but I don't think so. It was an oasis for the worker in a tedious work day, a fascination for the visitors, seeing the sights, a small world of its own that held some of the elements that made New York so dynamic, so interesting, and, oh, so alive. It had a breath of its own.
According to the New York Times on September 12, 2001, the attacks seemed carefully coordinated. The hijacked planes were all en route to California and therefore gorged with fuel, and their departures were spaced within an hour and 40 minutes. The first, American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 out of Boston for Los Angeles, crashed into the North Tower at 8:48 a.m. 18 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175, also headed from Boston to Los Angeles, plowed into the South Tower. Then an American Airlines Boeing 757, Flight 77, left Washington's Dulles International Airport bound for Los Angeles, but instead hit the western part of the Pentagon, the military headquarters where 24,000 people work, at 9:40 a.m. Finally, United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757 flying from Newark to San Francisco, crashed near Pittsburgh, raising the possibility that its hijackers had failed in whatever their mission was.
I didn't want to go back downtown, back to what was now being called Ground Zero. I was already down there every day in my mind. But eventually the time came when the office building downtown was ready and we were scheduled to return. And simply put, I didn't want fear to be my reason for not returning.
Because I wasn't sure how I would react, on November 10th, the Saturday before we were to return, I decided to go down to Ground Zero by myself. It was early, about 7 in the morning. It was another beautiful day. I stood on the corner of Fulton and Broadway in front of my office building, looking at number 5 World Trade Center, or rather the blackened, charred remains of it. I did what came so naturally those days. I started to cry.
My head was down. I felt an arm go around my shoulders. I looked up. It was a policeman. He tightened his grip on me and said,
Let it out.
I put my head on his shoulder and wept. Another officer approached us. As I tried to compose myself, they talked with me. I told them about my experiences of that day. They were incredibly consoling, and I soon felt comfortable with them, comfortable enough to ask if they might let me into Ground Zero, to stand where I had been on that day. One of them went to speak to his superior. He came back.
Just follow us.
They led me past security, past the barricades, and out onto Church Street, the street where I had been during most of the attack, the street where I had seen all those people jump from the buildings, the street I was on when the second plane hit, the street from which I'd had to run for my life.
Standing there, I felt it was an honor to be able to be there, a chance to acknowledge and honor and show my respects to all those courageous victims. Standing there, I thought about and accepted my part in that day. I took in the whole scope of the site. Only a small segment of the facade of the North Tower remained standing, the tower that I had run to, wanting to do something. I told the officers about that and pointed out where I had had to turn back. They assured me that I had probably saved my own life by doing that.
We stayed for about 15 to 20 minutes. When it was time to leave, I asked for a moment alone. They graciously stepped back, and I took my final moment with the site, with the spirits of those who had died, with the gratitude that I was alive. I had brought 6 roses with me. I laid them down, knowing they wouldn't remain there long. But for that moment, I had contributed something of beauty to this place of terror and loss.
It
was enough.
The attack on 9/11 was an attack that affected people from all over the world. It was more than just something terrible that happened in a place and to people far away from Iowa City. We had neighbors that were lost too. While we reflect on all those who lost their lives on 9/11, at this time we would like to mention by name those people who died that day who were from Iowa and surrounding states. In Iowa, Jim Clear. In Illinois, Kathy Bantus, Andrea Lynn Haberman, Suzanne Kondratenko, Daria Lean, Jeffrey Peter Mladnik. Lieutenant Commander Patrick Jude Murphy. Robert Arthur Rasmussen. Susan Sawyer. Commander Dan Frederick Schanauer. In Missouri, Randy Drake. Julie M. Geis. In Wisconsin, Lieutenant Colonel Dennis M. Johnson. In Nebraska, Captain Lawrence Daniel Getzfred. And at this time, I invite any of you to mention someone by name who you would wish to mention.
In honor and reflection of all who died, we will present a rose for each year that has passed since September 11th, 2001.
It must have been cold there in my shadow to never have sunlight on your face. You were content to let me shine, that's your way. You always walked a step behind. So I was the one with all the glory, while you were the one with all the strength. A beautiful face without a name for so long, a beautiful smile to hide the pain. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. It might have appeared to go unnoticed, but I've got it all here in my heart. I want you to know I know the truth. Of course I know it. I would be nothing without you. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I wish I could be. I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. Did you ever know that you're
at this time, we'd like to share our thoughts and memories of where we were on 9/11, where we see ourselves today. You guys a chance to talk about anything that's on your mind, about either memories or where you'd like to see the world go from here. Should we pass the microphone? Yes. Did someone want to start? Pass the mic to Michael. Oh, that's the mic to Michael. Pass it to Michael?
I think there's only one. Or is there?
I was traveling on business on 9/11. I was in Washington, D.C. I was traveling with two colleagues, and we had a meeting with representatives from Federal Student Aid and the U.S. Department of Education. And it was an important meeting. We had been planning for it for many weeks. And we arrived to meet with about 25 representatives from the department to talk about goals for the coming year and farther out, long-range goals. And we had started at 9 o'clock, and we were in a building called, I don't know what its formal name is, but it's referred to as the Portals Building, and it's across the Potomac from the Pentagon, the backside of the Pentagon, relative to where the plane hit the front of the building. And it was an expansive room, and we had our back to a window, and the facilitator, of course, is in the front of the room facilitating the meeting. And we had finished our coffee and our donut holes, and the meeting had started. And I remember going into the meeting, the cubicles outside the conference room where we were meeting, and how busy and active everyone was. And of course, you know, being business colleagues, we went around and we were shaking hands with people and meeting people, and you know, into the meeting. We were just getting started, and we started hearing sirens, a lot of sirens, and the facilitator was clearly agitated. Something happened, and no one thought to look or turn around and look behind us. But at a certain point, you know, someone came in and spoke to the facilitator, and she announced that you know, a code word for the department people that meant essentially that they were to leave their office and go home. And I don't mean to be facetious or anything, but I mean, people evacuated immediately. I mean, and we had traveled in several days before over the weekend to prepare, and we had our suitcases. We were going to get like a 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock flight out of National, so our suitcases were kind of stuck in a corner, and everybody left. All the department people left, and we were kind of standing there. I felt like a character from Godot, you know, kind of standing there with my suitcase, and the cubicles that were previously so active and populated were now vacant, and we went outside, and of course we were told not to take elevators, and we went outside, and downtown DC was being evacuated. It was a massive congestion of cars, all exiting to get onto the highway that takes them through the loops downtown. And it was, and we stood on a corner next to the Department of Agriculture building under a tree, and it was an absolutely gorgeous day, and we had no idea what was going on. And you know, people were talking about the World Trade Center, and we think, you know, this is being skeptical. We just didn't believe anything. But it didn't explain the evacuation going on around us. And, to my colleagues' esteem and to their, benefit, I mean, we stood patiently on a corner and just watched. And it was, we did try to hail a cab. Our company had an office, and still has an office in Arlington, Virginia, and we thought, well, perhaps we should go to the office. So we, as we usually do, we tried to hail a cab, and cabs were not taking passengers. And one cab said that they couldn't get across a bridge, that everything was closed. And we stood in the corner and just watched as traffic took up both lanes. I mean, took up both the incoming and outgoing, all trying to get out. And then the military started coming in, which I thought was kind of comical in some respects because, of course, there's thousands of cars trying to exit, and then you get a military convoy trying to come in. And the soldiers got out of trucks and walked ahead of the vehicles to try to clear cars so that the convoy could make their way through traffic. And that got a little aggressive. And while we're standing there, we had taken our suitcases and we'd kind of set them next to the Department of Agriculture building to be in the shade, rather than sitting out in the sun. And we would turn around and look and make sure they were still there and so forth. But at one point, I remember a pickup truck, a red pickup truck, was driving on the sidewalk and kind of sped up, and these guys jumped out and they went over to the suitcases, and they kind of kicked them and knocked them over, and we went over to them and said, what's going on? And they said, are these yours? And we said yes, and they said, do not leave anything sitting around. And I guess the notion there was that these were people being sent to check the perimeter of government buildings, and so we had to take them, and they were not patient. I mean, they were very firm, and we started to get a sense of something was going on, and cell phones weren't working, and I had walked to the subway stop at L'Enfant Plaza, which is only a few blocks away, and the subway was not running, and it was pretty much chaos. And anyway, we went, there was a coffee shop, and much like Artie talks about in the play, there's a coffee shop where they stayed open, and there was nothing else for them to do. They couldn't leave either, and they were serving coffee, and we got coffee and started watching television, and we started to get a sense of what was happening. And at one point, I used their phone in the restaurant and got a hold of the office, and they said, well, however you can get here, just get here. And I went out and tried to get a cab again, and cabs were not taking passengers. And I tried calling car rental places, and foolishly, I was calling car rental places in downtown DC, and they weren't renting cars. And either way, we sat in this restaurant until about 2 in the afternoon, and I heard that the subway was running. Someone in the restaurant said, I think the subway's running again. I think I heard that. So I walked down to L'Enfant Plaza again, and the subway was running, but not stopping at any of the Pentagon stops. They were bypassing the stops near the Pentagon, which was fine with us because we were going beyond that. And so we got on the subway and got to the office. And there were 13 people from our company who were in the DC area, and they were all gathering. And they had the foresight to go ahead and get rooms for people out at Dulles, and they had already gotten plane tickets for people. And I'm sorry, car rent. Planes weren't flying. They got rented cars. And so we got rides out to Dulles and stayed at the hotel that night. I do remember, this is kind of comical, I suppose, but there was one woman, a colleague, who was in Boston, and she tried to get an Amtrak ticket, and that didn't work, didn't pan out. And she took the instructions from our boss that she was to get there any way she could, so she rented the hotel limo from the hotel in Boston, and had the limo driver drive her from Boston to Arlington, Virginia. It was about a $900 bill, and she got there about 4 in the morning, and the limo driver said he was kind of looking forward to it because he had never been to DC before. So, And then when she got there at 4, we got in our rental cars and piled into 2 cars and drove back to Iowa and listened to the radio the whole time. We left at 4:30 in the morning and got back about 7 that evening. So it was, the reflection on the day was just, not knowing what was going on. Being in an unfamiliar spot was kind of unnerving. Concerns for my family and my colleagues, and just trying to get a handle. I mean, it seems so unbelievable. It just seems so unbelievable. And just as to kind of frame this story, my daughter had done an internship in New York the summer before. She had just returned to school a few weeks prior to 9/11. But for the summer, she had been in New York on an internship and had worked in the Empire State Building at a graphic design company. And I had spent several weeks with her in New York, getting her acclimated to riding the subway in New York and stuff. And I absolutely love Manhattan. I mean, I just, when I was there, I would walk all day. I would drop her off at the Empire State Building at work and then just walk all day. It was wonderful. And I loved Manhattan, and I thought it was just a wonderful spot. And I had heard such bad things about New York prior. But what they say about Rudy Giuliani cleaning up New York and making it inviting for tourists, it was true. I mean, it was very, very comfortable. And I'm kind of a cheapskate, so it's not as though I needed a lot of money. I mean, I just would walk and stop and get a cup of coffee and a bagel, and it was very, very inviting and comfortable. And I felt my daughter was safe, and she enjoyed it. And at the end of her internship, our whole family went out, and Grandma went, and we all went out and spent a few days touring New York and enjoying the sights. And so it's kind of ironic then that framing this was 9/11, and it's very sad for all of us. So we felt was particularly poignant, and we felt heartsick for the whole the city of New York for the circumstances that happened on 9/11.
I remember it was kind of an interesting morning for me because I had a training or a meeting that morning, and about as much as I heard going into the meeting was just something over the radio that a light plane had hit one of the towers, and it sounded like one of those, blips on the news that, before, in between songs or something, and so nothing really to think about. And by the time I'd gotten out of the meeting and come out, I was told the towers had fallen, the Pentagon had been hit, planes were falling, and just in the space of an hour and a half or so, and it just seems so unreal that the whole world can just shift like that in that short of a time. And I remember being at home with my family later that day, and telling my son Brandon that this is one of those moments that we're never going to be back before this day. It's like pre atomic bomb, pre Pearl 11 or Pearl Harbor. It's just one of those benchmark moments that from here on out everything's going to be different.
I'll say something. For me, I was here in Iowa, safe. At least we were supposed to be safe out here in the Midwest. But what I remember most about that day is my daughter was just less than a year old, and she was at her babysitter's house, and that was the first time that I felt really scared for her. She's in the middle of Iowa. These things are happening so far away, but it didn't matter. You still felt the fear even here. And the first thing I wanted to do was call, and I did, to find out, how, everything okay. And of course, everything was okay. The babysitter, of course, had the TV off. She turned it off because she had a bunch of little kids running around. And but that was, you kind of, I think having kids is what really put it in perspective of how, it's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. And like Brian said, it changed everything, and changed kind of how we view the world, I think. And that's kind of why we wanted to do this play, was to continue to talk about it and not let it be, I mean, it doesn't get forgotten, but, you know, people don't talk about it as much, and they certainly don't talk about that day as much as they get bogged down in what's happened since that day. And so that's why I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, that day and remember. I wondered if anybody out there would like to say anything and about your reflections of that day.
I was working in,
Why don't I give you
I think I have a big enough voice.
Yeah.
Recording.
I was working in the otolaryngology department at University Hospitals when that terrible moment happened. We had a break room that had a television in it, and we heard the news. Almost everybody in the department spent most of the day going in and out of that room, watching the screen, talking to each other, holding each other, frightened and fearful for everybody that was involved. We had several of our faculty members were in Denver at a conference. And because, of course, the planes were all grounded because of the flight's dangers, they were stuck there with no way to get home. I have a chauffeur's license. When it was determined that they were able to find a bus that could bring not only those faculty members, but there was a symposium going on, and so there were faculty members from several different areas, several different states, and they were all there. So half a dozen different hospital groups got a bus and got back as far as Adair, Iowa. From that point, 3 groups got together in a 14-passenger van. Jeff, how many were in the van with us? I think there were 16 or 17, plus all their luggage. And we drove them from Adair to Des Moines to a truck stop where people from Minneapolis came down and picked up their people, and people from, I believe it was St. Louis, drove up and picked up their people. And then I took the rest of our group back to Iowa City, and some of them to Cedar Rapids. They'd left their cars there. So it was a very trying time, not just because of the fear, but also because of the way it affected how we were doing our business, how we were taking care of our patients, how we were taking care of each other. The thing that I remember most was I had made a phone call just after 9 o'clock to wish my son happy 25th birthday, and said there was some kind of accident in New York. You might want to turn on the TV and see what's going on. He turned it on just in time to see the second plane hit the second tower. And it was a frightening time for everybody. I still get emotional about it because while I didn't know anyone personally who was devastated by the events through a death or injury, there were people that we knew in New York and were afraid for, and thankfully the people that we knew made it all right, but it was very frightening. And to this day, I get teary-eyed. I get choked up when I think about things. When I see things on television, I cry. Because it had a very emotional impact on me. Like Matt said, you imagine Iowa is safe, but at this point in time, there isn't any place that's safe unless we make it so, and there has to be a way to do that. We don't have all the answers. We may never have all the answers, but doing things like this where we can talk about it and feel safe while we talk about it, and trying to figure out what we can do, and holding each other up either mentally or physically or emotionally, however it is, this is one way of making it safe.
there anybody else who would like to talk? Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks, somebody.
When I first found out about 9/11, I had a doctor's appointment. So I was walking through the Penn Mall, and nobody was in the Penn Mall. All the young students, they were in the bars, and these gigantic TV screens, and they were watching, and they were glued to the screen. So, I kept walking, because I didn't want to be late for the doctor. And then when I got to the doctor's office, I said, well, I think I heard something about a plane flying into one of the towers, because it wasn't any radios on in there. And, that day, and I came back, and I got this old television. It plays when it feels like playing. So I didn't watch it, and I didn't watch it that day, but the next day I watched it. And then I couldn't understand why these TV stations kept playing it over and over, like it was entertainment. I guess they were so fixated on movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I watched it, but I really didn't become afraid, because originally I'm from Philadelphia. When you're from the city, you have so many tragedies until you get over things really quick. This is why the people in New York seem like it doesn't bother them. You can't afford that in the city. You keep your life going. And I had just come back not too long from Saudi Arabia, so I had a whole year of terror. So when I came back here, nothing could frighten me. And the only thing that bothered me was I couldn't understand why they picked Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace was the worst song you ever could have picked, because it was a man, he was a slaver. And when he prayed and everything, he got over his situation. But as soon as he got over his situation, he started back slaving again. It's like that song put a curse on us. And then we ended up in Iraq. But it's tragic, but then you have to think some people live like that in the world every day. So that we only had one 9/11. And thank God it wasn't an atomic attack. They used the elementary things to put the learned things to shame. 2 airplanes, and the irony is an American airline and a United airline. So, it's tragic that it's happened, but it's happened, and you can't bring people back to life, but you have to think about, there's so many things to think about. But I think about 9/11. And, Iowa City gives you this false sense of safety. And it's hard to imagine being frightened here, but it's a tragedy that's happened, and we just have to get beyond it, because we're better than that. And we'll get over it as time goes by, because Pearl Harbor, they thought, oh, we'll never get over that, We'll never get over this. It'll never be the same. But we're the same already. We're back. We're doing our thing, and we're making it. Right now, we're in you could say Iowa's the center of the world now. Everybody's coming here, Everything that falls off the tree rolls in here. But, we got to keep on moving, because we just got to. What's going to happen to the rest of the world if we break down and just cry and boo-hoo and this? No. You get up, because we better. That's all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
When it happened to us over at McDonald's, and there's this bunch of buses pulled in, and we just started saying prayer, just like everybody else says. There just needs to be prayer around here for all this going on.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, that morning I woke up to the clock radio, and it was saying something about an airplane that had crashed into one of the towers, and When I got up, was watching TV, that's when I saw the second tower being hit. And then I immediately had to get in my car and go to the crisis center in Iowa City because my shift was starting. And I wasn't there very long, and I never have my cell phone on at the crisis center because you're not supposed to. And anyway, my cell phone rang, and it was my son, and just thinking about it, my heart's beating. He told me he was on his way to New York City. He works for Musco Lighting. They do temporary outdoor lighting, and they had been in within a couple of hours. They had been on another gig and a lighting job, and they were very close to where it all happened. So they were on their way, and they were being transported with help by the highway patrol on the interstate, and with sirens going. And Scott hadn't seen any of the footage on TV. None of them had at Musco, that whole crew. All they did was they were just listening to the radio. So when they got to Ground Zero, Scott said he felt like he was just watching a movie, because there wasn't any other way to see this. This couldn't be real. And so when he called me and told me he was on his way there, I was watching what he hadn't seen yet. I was watching on the TV at the crisis center because nobody was calling in, nobody was coming in. Everyone was watching their TV at home. So I talked to Scott for the small amount of time I had, and all I said to him was, whatever's going to be happening there, it's probably, there are going to be times you're going to be shutting yourself off, and it's going to be coming in waves for you, because I knew he was going to be there for a while. And so I was able to talk to him every single day. Took about 20 to 25 times to try and reach him by cell phone, but one of us got together, reached the other person, and we talked every single day. And his feelings of helplessness, because he wasn't there to help to dig people out. He was there to do the outdoor lighting, and to mostly observe. And my prayer at the time, I remember my prayer was, let him get through this time where he doesn't see body parts. And of course he did, but what he came away with this, I mean, we talked about it today, he came away with this reverence for life, and because whenever either a body or a body part was found, there were prayers said in such a reverent way. There was such a coming together of spirit, and he said he felt so honored to be part of it. He was there for 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks, and then then other crews came in, and then 3 months later he came back, and he said it seemed so sterile because buildings were gone. It just seemed like it was another planet almost. He'll never be the same, and none of us ever will be the same. I felt so honored to be able to have that connection with my son when he was going through this tragedy and this revelation and changing of his life forever. And I just saw that, just like we saw weeks after that, we saw all of these people coming together. How many hundreds of people came to New York City just to help out, dropped everything completely. Didn't matter if they had jobs, they just went there. They knew they had to help, whatever that help was. And so there just seems to be a renewed hope that I feel, and humanity.
So we'll be like Phoenix, rise up out of the ashes? Do you think that we'd be like that? We'd be like Phoenix, and rise up?
We do with God's help.
So start over then.
Thanks very much. Anyone else?
I want to ask a question. Now, we saw all the confusion in New York because we didn't know what to do. And then in 2005, with Katrina, we still didn't know what to do. Only time we ever knew something of what to do, Greensburg, Kansas. That's the only thing, if you mean from '01 to '07, we still haven't figured out what to do. Because this is not, it's going to happen again. So what do we do? How do we prepare?
It's a good question. I certainly don't have the answer. I don't know. I think that's kind of what people are talking about now as we move forward in an election cycle. I think that people are talking about exactly that. You know, who's going to help us get to the point where we are prepared? You know, so I think that's a question that's going to be talked about a lot in the next year and a half. So it's a great question.